June 1940, Hitler entered Paris, and the German set up collaborations with the Vichy regime to rule over the occupied France. The Vichy government administered the French colony as well. The tripartite alliance enabled Japan to make negotiation with the Vichy government to station troops in the northern region of the French colony of Indochina. Tensions started between USA and France. Throughout 1930, America helped China but did not make any commitment, just helped China. Later on, it seemed that Roosevelt broke the commercial treaty with Japan. This step freed USA to place an embargo on export to Japan. When Japan moved into northern Indochina, the America indeed countered it with a gradually expanding export embargo. For this made the Japanese very furious, and they decided to go for a war. On the other hand, it seems that Hitler complicated the situation when he broke peace with Stalin and attacked Soviet Union in June 1941. Japanese chose not to go for a war with Hitler, its goals. And within 2 months earlier, it seems in April 1941, Konyo concluded a neutrality agreement with Russia. The agreement left Japan as the virtual ruler of the former French colony. The US countered this advance with a strong threatening move, and Roosevelt paralleled together an international embargo that cut all foreign oil supplies to Japan. It also offered low-cost military supplies to China. This annoyed Japan very much because Japan required oil for military and economic reasons. It faced a difficult choice. It would have to agree to US terms and conditions if it required the upliftment of the embargo. USA told Japan that they have to retreat from China or there would be a war. On the other hand, at this situation, Japan decided to go for a parallel course. On one hand, Japan decided partial retreatment from China and also decided to attack the US forces. Therefore, it seems at this moment, the Prime Minister of Japan, Konai, was replaced by General Tojo Hideki. He held the position of Prime Minister and also the Army Minister. So situations gradually became very tense during this period. And Japanese and Americans were having a tense situation and they were facing lots of tension.
On 7 December 1941, Japan launched a large-scale air attack on Pearl Harbor, the naval base of USA. It was a serious attack and entire naval base of USA at the Pearl Harbor had been devastated and destroyed. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor was a watershed in the history of the Second World War. So long, the United States of America was not a very active partner of the Second World War. She had just supported the allies, that is Great Britain and France, against the fascist forces like Italy and Germany. But when Pearl Harbor had been attacked, America could not afford to remain indifferent to the entire developments of the Second World War. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1941 led to the Pacific War in the history of Far East, and soon the Pacific War became an integral part of the Second World War, and the Second World War entered into a new phase. And soon we would see that Great Britain, France had joined hands with America and Soviet Russia in the attack of Nazi Germany's attack on Soviet Russia in June 1941. A grand alliance had been formed between America, Soviet Russia, Great Britain and France, and their motto was to defeat the fascist forces of Europe and the aggressive force like Japan in Asia.
Thus ended a complex set of diplomatic and military maneuvers, Japan had plunged into war that proved devastating for the people throughout Asia. At key moments, Japanese leaders miscalculated. At the time when Japan attacked Manchuria, they could not realize that the nationalist government would resist, or they would be facing strong resistance. At the same time, when they attacked Pearl Harbor, they did not realize that US would be willing to cut off all trade with Japan to defend British and Dutch colonies. It is true that USA moves to block Japan's advancement in 1940, and thus war became inevitable. In the Pacific region also, Japan had swift victories in Army and Navy. The attack of Pearl Harbor destroyed the heart of US Pacific Fleet. A daring drive down the Malay Peninsula drove out the British and delivered Singapore to Japan. Japan controlled this region in February 1942. The campaign for Philippines ended with a victory by May. The US General Douglas MacArthur had to move away to Australia, and therefore it seems after this that Japan controlled Burma or took away Burma from Britain. Moreover, it seems that Japan tried to control the Dutch East Indies position from Indonesia to Borneo, and it also occupied the Celebes. They also occupied the islands of South and Central Pacific region. Moreover, at the Coral Sea warfare, Japanese soldiers they were stopped, and they also stopped from attacking Australia. Just after this, at the Midway Island of the Pacific Ocean, Japanese also faced defeat. The US destroyed 4 warships of Japan. More or less, the Japanese were also attacked by the Allies in the New Guinea area by the mid-1942. On the other hand, it seems that the Allies' power also controlled the New Guinea's area. In 1945, the Allied powers controlled the Philippines area. Another Allied force in 1943 attacked the Gilbert Island. In 1944, Japan tried to cross the Arakan area and move towards British India to occupy Manipur and Assam. Throughout this region, the British was trying to help China through this way, and Japan wanted to stop the path. On the other hand, Japan joined hand with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, with the help of Japan, wanted to free India from British colonial rule. Though the Japanese were not at all interested in freeing India, they wanted to take up the political opportunity. At that time, in 1944 March, the Azad Hind Force hoisted the Indian flag at Kohima, but the Japanese were defeated in Burma and in the Indian border area. At last, in 6th August 1945, the US bombed Hiroshima. On 9th August 1945, Nagasaki was bombed. On 8th August, the Soviet Union decided to attack Japan. At this juncture, the Japanese Prime Minister wanted an end of the war. On 15th August 1945, the Japanese Prime Minister declared that the war should end. And on 2nd September 1945, he signed the surrender documents.
You talked about the tremendous anti-Japanese public opinion in USA. Was this mainly because of economic reasons, because of Japan's aggressive foreign policy, or did it involve some kind of racism as well? Because I've read somewhere that USA deliberately dropped the atom bomb on Japan and not on any country inhabited by the white master race like Germany or Italy, even though they were equally enemies. And even in the Hollywood movie Pearl Harbor, we find that the Japanese are shown in a very bad light, as if they're almost subhuman. Though many Hollywood movies dealing with the Holocaust, even though they are anti-German, they project the Germans as cruel, they don't inferiorize the Germans like they inferiorize the Japanese?
In one of my earlier lectures, I told about the Japanese immigration problem in the USA. From 1905, 6, 7, a large number of Japanese laborers had been immigrating to USA. They were very skilled laborers. The US industrialists would like to employ the Japanese. So from then on, anti-Japanese attitude developed in USA. There is no doubt about it. And in 1915, this was even bitter. The feeling was against Japan. That was a very important reason, and there might have been some racial problem that Japan had been shown in a very bad light. I have not seen the movie. I have not seen it. But one thing, it must be stated that Japan was very bad imperialist country, no doubt. Manchurian attack was very inhuman. Japan's relationship with China was very bad, always aggressive. Japan was an imperial. But what was about Britain, America and other states? In the name of open door policy, they also wanted to grab the Chinese market like anything. It was Britain, France, Tsarist Russia and even United States of America transformed China in the Far East into a semi-colony. It was their semi-colony, and they were all very much wanted to take profit out of the Chinese market. They were not better. They did not like when Japan became a competitor to them, to the Western powers. There is no doubt about it. But as far as Pearl Harbor incident was concerned, at that time Japan was very much aggressive and USA had to check Japan. But there is another thing, apart from racist, I don't know whether it should be analyzed in this manner or not, it should be interpreted in this manner or not. Was racism there? There might have been. But there was another thing. Neither Nazi Germany nor fascist Italy did strike American interest in any way. But Japan was the first country who showed that I can attack you. In 1812, America was struck by France, first attack. Then in 1941, America was again struck by Japan. America can be attacked. It went beyond American prestige, American dignity. He had confidence, Cordellal, I cannot be attacked. Nobody have got the courage to launch an attack on me. It was another important reason. And you can see the same thing in recent years. After the incident of 9/11, Bush declared war for eternal justice and gave Afghanistan, Iraq, these countries a lesson, Why? After Pearl Harbor, again America was attacked. In the So it is in the nature, very much, it is embedded in the American imperialist policy that America cannot tolerate that I have been attacked. And I shall give the attacker, invader a lesson. It was the main reason. Germany and Italy did not attack America, and it did not jeopardize American interest, hamper American interest in any way. But Japan had the courage to bomb Pearl Harbor. How? And the US attack was much more inhuman than the Japanese aggression. There is no doubt. It was a slur on the entire civilization.
It was a very big incident, that how this war started, how Japan got involved in this war, and at last how it was defeated and had to sign the surrender incident. Such a devastating incident naturally has lots of consequences and effects. So it seems it left physical and emotional scars both inside and outside Japan. More than 50 years later, these wounds were not yet healed up. At the same time, the war laid the ground for a different world at the post-war period. By temporarily hosting out the British, French, Dutch and USA, from Southeast Asia, Japan tried to demise colonialism from Asia. By developing modern industry in the colonies from Korea to Manchuria and in Taiwan, they fostered post-war industrialization. But millions of people suffered from this war. The roll call of devastation included Nanjing massacre, lots of atrocities in China, the Vietnamese famine, and the hopeless campaign of Indian National Army. In addition, 36,000 British and American prisoners of war died in captive position, and the survivors nursed intense anger for decades. Another group of victims received much less public attention at the time and immediately after war. These were the thousands of young girls and women who were forced to work at Comfort Station near the front line of the battlefields. About 80% was the Korean, Chinese, Japanese, and there were some Europeans. All these women were forced to serve as prostitutes for Japanese army. There was also a traumatic condition among the Japanese people. About 1.7 million soldiers died between 1937 and 1945. About 300,000 prisoners of war perished in the Soviet detention camps. After the war, air raid left 9 million people homeless and killed 200,000 people. 2 atomic bombs killed additional 200,000 people and civilians. All human beings within the 2 miles of radius were killed. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became hellish zones of fire, destruction and death for months and for years after the war ended. So this great war, the Second World War, totally destroyed Japan and its population. The whole population suffered due to this great war. There was many people were homeless, many people were jobless. There was a total massacre in Japan. And it seems that people suffered. They were physically ill. They were not only emotionally ill, they were physically ill because the 2 great atom bombs really destroyed the total population of Japan. And the Japanese could not recover this destruction. They suffered for the next 50 years or the next 100 years. Till today, the Japanese are suffering due to this Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. But still, after this war ended, though Japan and Germany really suffered in this war, but a new order started, and after this war, the world walked down the path of the Cold War. It is seen that with the Second Sino-Japanese War, Japan entered into the Second World War. And later it is seen that Japan had rivalry with China, Japan had rivalry with Russia, Japan had rivalry with the Western powers, and therefore Japan joined hand with Hitler. And the Anti-Comintern Pact prepared the background. Japan and Germany were committed to each other. Later on, in 1937, Italy joined this pact to cooperate with each other and to oppose communism. Later on, it seems that Japan attacked the Pearl Harbor and destroyed totally the US Pacific Fleet. On the other hand, in the Pacific region, it seems that Japan controlled the Dutch Indies from Indonesia to Borneo. It conquered the islands of Central and South Pacific area. It controlled Burma. It controlled Philippines. It controlled New Guinea. On the other hand, it seems it controlled the other parts of Southeast Asia because it was very strategic for Japan, because Japan wanted to control the natural resources of this area, because Japan had a space problem. But ultimately, it seemed that the Allied power defeated Japan in 1944 in 1943 and occupied Philippines, occupied Burma, occupied Gilgit Island, and ultimately the Americans bombed the Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 1945. On 8th August, Russia attacked Japan. And ultimately, on 15th August, the Japanese Prime Minister declared that the war should end. And on 2nd September 1945, Japan signed the surrender declaration. Now, such a big war, it has lots of consequences. It left psychological and physical scar on the minds of the people. They suffered for 50 years. People died in millions. People became homeless. People could not survive because they were very much sick due to this bombing. On the other hand, there were a group of war victims who were very unnoticed. They were thousands and thousands of women, young women and girls. They were forced to work in the comfort stations. So it seems that this total war brought about a great trauma to Japan. Nearly 1.7 million soldiers died between 1937 and 1945. This war totally destroyed the political and economic system of Japan, and the Japanese could not survive after this great war. And ultimately, the Japan, after the war, took time to reconstruct its states. And after the Second World War, the world was divided into two armed camps. On the one hand, it was US, and on the other hand, it was the Russian armed camp. And the world moved towards the Cold War era.